Someone had to say it. Welcome back to Someone Had to Say It. On today's episode, I interviewed the authors of Life Derailed, Beth Merlin and Danielle Modaferi. We talked about artificial intelligence, which they write about in their novel, and online dating, writing and publishing a book, and so much more. We truly hope you enjoyed this episode, and make sure to see the show notes and where and how to get all their books. Please enjoy, subscribe, share, and leave us a comment. Thank you so much. Enjoy. All right, welcome back to Someone Had to Say It, and welcome to another episode with some amazing authors. I read a very cool book that was sent to me by Beth Merlin and Danielle Modaferi. Did I
Yes,
say it
Modaferi. Very good
right?
job. Yes.
Called Life Derailed. And I loved the book. So I had to have them on the podcast. So welcome, you guys.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for having
Thanks
us.
for having us.
Of course. Thank you for being here. I want to talk to you not just about your book, but everything. Everything writing, how you came to be. And Beth and I were talking a little bit beforehand how you guys started together, writing together, because that's a whole other thing,
Oh, yeah,
co-writing, a book. But
absolutely.
we can start with your book because, first of all, I love that it's so modern and contemporary, and it's very much about what's we're living through, right? AI, ChatGPT, all of the
Mm-hmm.
technology. I loved it, and without giving too much away to readers, because it just came out last month, I think in April,
Mm-hmm.
right?
hmm
Mm-hmm.
Um, First of all, I want to ask you, how did the idea come about? And I guess a follow-up question, did this kind of happen to you guys? Because, as a matchmaker, you guys are talking
Mm.
about online dating,
hmm
creating a profile, which is everything that I do. And someone told me, and I know some of the matchmakers use ChatGPT or AI to create profiles. I don't. I haven't. I don't even want to go there. But there's obviously, I don't know how much you want to give out about the book, but how did the story come about just with the AI and the online dating part, at least?
It was newer. I mean, people were starting to use ChatGPT a little bit. We were talking about it. We were also we had written and published another book with Motley called The Last Phone Booth in Manhattan. It was really successful. It got chosen as what's called like an Amazon first read, which is kind of each month they pick a handful of books to highlight and really, really promote. And it did really, really well. And then we had a follow up to that called Heart Restoration Project. And then we were kind of, ready to come up with a new idea. And we were batting back and forth a lot of different ones. And then I think I saw a New York Times article or like a little op-ed that said, I think the headline was something like, I got fooled by an AI bot, or I got fooled in love by an AI bot, or I fell in love with an AI bot. It
Yeah,
was something like
something.
that.
Yeah.
And I sent it to Danielle and I said, I feel like there could be something here. But we have to write it really, really fast, was kind of how I felt, because I felt like somebody was going to take the idea if we didn't get to it first. And we did it pretty fast because we were worried somebody else was, going to have a similar story. Right.
Yeah, we were talking about that the other day. That's actually what brought the conversation up yesterday. Was I'm a teacher by day, and one of the teachers was reading it, and she's one of the secretaries at the school is also reading it. So anyway, they were talking about how contemporary it felt, and they said, "When did you write this? Because it feels like it's happening right this minute." So like to imagine that you wrote it however long ago. Like you must have been right on the cusp, or like right on the precipice of when it kind of kicked off, and it really felt like we did catch it early. And it was kind of that it's very, very like, I don't know, nubile stage that we were only guessing kind of the capacity of what it could do.
Right, but it's so true. I mean, it can do anything, everything. I mean, forget about just helping you with homework, right? Kids were
Exactly.
using stuff to write essays. I remember my son, finishing high school and it was just starting. And he was like, I have to be careful. We were only
Oh
allowed to
yeah.
use it to check stuff, right? To
Mm-hmm.
check grammar and spelling and whatever. But he's like, no, there's kids using it to write their essays. And then
Yes.
they started having those programs where you can run something through to
And
see if it
see.
Mm-hmm.
was, written by
Right.
AI, which is kind of crazy that you guys were like so right when it happened, just starting this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, which you and I were chatting about for a couple minutes before the call, we tried really hard to not take, a very specific position on the issue, right? So you have Jason, the main character, who sees all of its potential and all the ways it can help a struggling business. And, I think we have kind of a part of the book where, a whole fashion shoot falls apart and the AI is able to kind of salvage it at a fraction of the cost, and it saves the magazine so much money, right? And then,
Right.
of course, on the other side, you have Remy, who, all she sees is that it's somehow going to like suck the humanity out of, telling
Right.
human interest stories. And how can you tell a human interest story through an AI, platform?
Yeah.
So, and they continue to kind of battle, throughout the book, like that concept. Um, and it was, a delicate dance, because obviously as writers we have certain opinions on AI. But
Right.
we wanted to be careful and not come down too hard, I
Right.
think, in either camp, and just sort of
Camp.
Right.
Of
show
course.
it's good, and there definitely are, and some of the, potential ramifications of a technology like that.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's kind of how I always tell people about online dating. When it first came about, I thought, oh my gosh, this is an amazing tool to help people, right? Because
Sure.
people that don't work in a big company, don't go into an office, that work remote, or just don't have a way to meet other people, online dating was a great idea, whoever came up with it. But there's also pitfalls and negatives and positives. It's everything, right? It's like
Right.
anything in real life. You can't it's not, it shouldn't be one extreme or the other. There's got to be a middle ground with everything. You have to be careful, and you have to spend time, and you have to teach it as well. AI, it seems to be very predictive, but it's also, I was watching a video the other day. Actually, it was a rabbi that was talking about how artificial intelligence is really taught to be very human, right? And to be complementary to us. So that was one of the things I was thinking about as I was reading the book too. It was so, watching the exchange between them. Obviously it was a fake person, but it,
Right.
it was very complimentary too. It's like, gosh, this just seems to be too good to be true. But I have a 25-year-old son who is a good person, good and decent person. He would totally write something like that because he's just a
Right.
good-hearted person. But I'm like, ooh, this is very, you have to be careful. Obviously,
Yeah.
there's so many positives, but so I guess in moving past AI and everything, I just want to know, like, how did you guys start co-writing? Because that's a very different process than writing your book yourself from beginning to end, having two different personalities, two different people, two different everything. First of all, how did you meet and how did you decide to do this together?
Yeah. So I guess I can kick it off. A little while ago, went to school for writing popular fiction. But when I left, I had to write my thesis, which was a full-length novel. And after I wrote that, I said, "Oh my God, I'm never writing another book." That was very hard, and oh my gosh, labor of love. But I was very interested in the kind of the business side of it for a little bit, and how um, that end of it worked. And so anyway, long story short, I had started my own publishing company, and Beth was the first author that I had signed on to my company. And we started working together and collaborating on uh, a bunch of books that she had written. And then we decided, oh, we had gotten optioned as for a film by a producer for the Campfire series. And
Wow.
when they came to us for that, it was for a full-length feature. So we had come up with this whole pitch for a full-length feature, and we worked together to collaborate on that project and pitched it, and that was just very cool experience, but really helped us bond together over a project we were working on together, with characters that we knew very well. So
you got to know each other and
yeah,
understand how the other one works and operate.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have a lot of similarities in the things that we love, but the really cool thing about me and Beth is we very much are like the yin to one another's yang. And we always joke that she is like the architect and I am like the interior decorator.
Great.
And it is really great. And I think that after writing so many books together, uh, we've gotten better at our other things. So like I've gotten a little bit better at the architect stuff and I can notice a little bit more of the maneuvering around.
Mm.
And Beth is, a lot more colorful with some of the descriptions that she comes in with. And so it's just very cool to see how we are rubbing off on one another, but we write in a way that it's pretty much like in tandem or in real time in a shared document. We'll get on a Zoom call together, have a shared document open, and be working the same scene
Wow.
together. So that's how we get our voice to be pretty seamless. We can write full scenes, and sometimes we do, depending on time. I'll write
Mhm.
a whole scene, and then I said, "Oh, okay, I'll take care of this dinner scene with the family, and you, when she comes back from the dinner and has to have the fight with the boyfriend, like you write that scene, I'll write this scene,
Right.
go." And then we'll go back through together when we get on the call, and we'll read through it and like fix it all up. She'll like tweak the dialogue. I'll put in all the dialogue tags and what they're doing and all the scenery. Like we just go back and forth on wherever it's deficient or needs some zhuzhing.
Yeah.
Um,
But did you have to did you talk a lot about it ahead of time? Okay, here's how we're gonna work together. You're gonna do this, I'll do this. Or was it just kind of a seamless kind of like, let's take it one day at a time and see
Yeah,
how it
it's
goes?
definitely been an evolution because
yeah.
the very first book. So when we kind of decided, okay, I think there's a good like partnership here. I think we definitely bring out, strengths of one another, and what we seem to be writing together is actually better than what we're doing separately, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I approached Danielle and I said, look, I think maybe let's try and do this on a bigger scale. Obviously, so appreciative of her publishing company, but small indie press. And
Right.
I said, would you be interested in trying to find an agent? And to do that, you have to have a brand new work.
Yeah.
So I said, I have kind of an idea, and would you want to work on it? And she said yes. So we started writing that book. I think we learned a lot from it. It did end up getting published. That book is out and
Oh.
it was acquired, and it's called Heart Restoration Project. Um, we wrote a lot of that separately, and
Mm-hmm.
then it would come together. And right, a book is a house of cards. So if in chapter 1 you talk about how the character doesn't know how to drive for whatever reason, and then in chapter 5 Danielle's writing a whole chapter of her driving through the countryside, you realize something has to change, right? Like we had different ideas of what this character does or likes or what we said about them. And so that book, I think ultimately it went through a lot of developmental edits, and I think the voice is pretty seamless, but it took a lot more revising because, different chapters, we had kind of different impressions of things. And
Mm-hmm.
so after that book, and probably because of the editing of that book, which then we were doing together in a Google Doc,
Right.
like together, and rewriting scenes together to make sure that they were cohesive.
Mm-hmm.
After that book, we started that process kind of forward, which is we basically do write in tandem. Like we get on a Zoom call, which is tricky, right? We have very different schedules, but we set aside certain times of the week to pretty much always write.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we often like kind of talk about whatever, before we hang up the call, before we talk about what we're going to kind of get to in the next call. And then we sit down and we write out those chapters together.
Mhm.
Occasionally, when we're a little pressed for time, as you mentioned, one of us will kind of move forward in the story a little bit, but we always jump back together.
So you're also kind of learning as you went along. You learn how the other operates and what worked better, what didn't, right? But I guess so. That brings me to my next question. Do you still have your publishing company?
Oh, yeah, I do. I just I haven't been taking submissions. I just the authors that I have, I represent, they have kind of slowed down themselves in writing. And I said, hey, if you guys want to come up with another book, you want to, publish another book, I'm happy to publish your book. I believe in your writing. But they kind of slowed down just at the same time that I was kind of ramping things up with Beth. And so the timing of it seemed, so it still exists. It's called Firefly Hill Press. And it's our little baby, but I think it was the way that, it brought Beth and I together, which is just always very serendipitous. And we talk about it all the time, the timing of things and how it all kind of came to be. So, yes, I do, but it's not as kind of flourishing, and we're not really focusing on that as much, with the writers kind of taking a hiatus.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, I'm sure, and it's interesting. As I'm trying to find a publisher, or at least for my books have been, nonfiction. I'm trying to write about the matchmaking industry. It's hard to find a publisher who's interested in something like that. So did you take? Yeah. So did you take? And we could talk about that, more another time. But I think, did you take on only fiction writers?
Yeah, only fiction. Yeah. For a bit of time, it was young adult and contemporary, mostly like female-centric stories. That was always at the heart of. I used to teach at an all-girls school, and I have two sisters, and that always kind of like that. I don't know, idea of I'd like to write stories that are, with agency, and that the happily ever after isn't a ring on the finger. It's whatever she wants it to be. And if she gets that ring on her finger, it's the cherry on top. But there's something that she needs to realize or fulfill in herself and achieve. And I always thought that was really important messaging for my students and my girls. And so anyway, that was and I represented all female authors that that wrote those kinds of books. And so that was very cool for me too, to be able to get those stories out. Felt very fulfilling, especially as a teacher. I was learning a lot along the way, having my own publishing company and never done, doing it before. But also, they were authors like Beth. I was very selective about who I took on, and it was a very symbiotic kind of process. We worked together. It was very collaborative and kind of hands-on, and helped to brainstorm and whatever they needed. So it kind of felt like I was able to a little bit pay it forward with teaching and editing and whatever I learned throughout my, I don't know, career and stuff, that I could kind of help develop this book and make someone else's dream of publishing come true. Right. So.
Well, and it's interesting because how long I've been trying to, because I self-published my book after just getting rejections. So my first book, it is a different type of book. I was told, write the matchmaking book first. You have a platform. It's more interesting.
Right.
Which I didn't. I was like, you know what? I want to do this book about our story about coming to America, and all the struggles and being a Jewish immigrant and being a minority. And I think we just recently gained a minority status, actually.
Oh, wow.
People were not considered a minority, all of a sudden. I think, there was some kind of a law or something that were just passed, I want to say last year, 2024. So technically, we're technically a minority now, which is kind of interesting that we weren't before, being one of the smallest people, in the world. But I remember I went through, years and years and years submitting to publishers. And this was before you had to find an agent, before. And, I remember my friends, they read it. So many people read it and they're like, oh my God, this is hysterical. There's funny short stories. And they're like, why don't you just publish it yourself? And this was before self-publishing was a thing, right?
Yeah.
And people would tell them, just start your own publishing company and take on these people that they keep saying no. And I'm thinking, what made you decide to start your own publishing company, and how much how much did you have to learn, I guess, to start it?
So yeah, that was actually the element of grad school that I felt was most efficient. We had one module and it was like four semesters in, which was like way too late at that point, way too much of an investment for me to bail. So I was like, I guess I'm in it now. Like 4 of the 6 semesters that we were there. But it was called Business of Writing, and talked a lot about, and this was at the time, 2013 or something, about the percentages that authors receive compared to the rest of the industry, right? And I was like, wait, I don't understand. It's the author's work that seems so crazy to me, like that they're getting so little of the the selling price anyway. So
Yeah.
I couldn't really believe it, but we didn't get much more than that. And so as I said, writing the book, as I had gone into the program thinking I always wanted to be a writer, I wrote the book on my own and didn't have the right guidance. Beth and I can really attest to the importance of, I'm a true convert, the importance of an outline, but we can get
Mhm.
into that another time. But I think that that's how you are as, productive as, and make
Yeah.
the words, flow and everything. Anyway, so yeah, I think just I didn't know what I wanted to do after writing the book and being like, oh my God, that was really hard. I don't know if I have another one in me. um, I went back to the idea of business and I said, maybe I can support other writers. I want to find the diamond in the rough. I want to find the next whatever. So I dreamt of being the girl that like sat in the closet with the slush pile at some, publishing house. And I was like, oh, I'm going to find the next diamond in the rough. So I said, but why couldn't I just do that? And then maybe try to figure out a model where I can make it more equitable, in terms of like the profit sharing, and something a little bit more author centric, that
Mhm.
coming
Right.
at it from someone who has written the book and like slogged through it and thought it was like, I know that it's a lot of work, and I know, not that I'm saying that others in the industry don't appreciate that, but just the imbalance of the funds, it seemed crazy to me. So I
Yeah.
figured if there was a way that I could help to, I don't know, come up with a way that I could find these great authors and represent these stories that may be going unnoticed, um, support female voices, and try and find those kinds of stories. I was like, oh, this kind of sounds really appealing. I
Mhm.
did ask 3 of my friends from grad school. We were all over the country. One in Savannah, Georgia. One's out in Calabasas, I think, California,
Mhm.
and my friend in Chicago. So we were like, and I'm in Philadelphia. So like we were all over the place. And I said, let's do this, everything online and whatnot. But they all had so much going on. They said, I really can't. So then I thought, do I want to continue this? Is this something I even want to do? And I said, you know what? Why not? So it
Right.
took about a year for me to open up for, I think I opened submissions, uh, maybe it wasn't quite a year, but it took me a year to really start reading through submissions and like
Mhm.
considering, because in that year I read all about publishing and the business, and I came up with a contract and tried to meet with lawyers to make sure that this was a good contract, and what do I know of writing any of this stuff. So it was a
Right.
very steep learning curve. And I definitely made mistakes along the way, but I will say that I published under my publishing company my thesis novel. So
Mm.
that was like my trial run. I
Right.
said, I got a developmental editor. I had it properly edited. It definitely, now looking back, needs probably a whole host of more editing, but it was the first book I ever wrote, and I had to hire a cover artist. I had to hire a proofreader and all these a la carte things. And where do I find them? And how do I do this? I went through it with my own book so that it was a little bit less risky if it all fell apart. There was a mess, and I
Yeah.
didn't want to like take that risk with someone else's work my first time out of the gate. So um,
That's
yeah, it was an interesting experience. I definitely learned a lot and made a lot of mistakes, and sometimes they were costly and sometimes they were timely, but at the end of the day I still loved doing it, and so I kind of kept moving forward. And
yeah.
Beth, I found her book and I thought it was just delightful. And I remember reading it and being like, oh my gosh, this might be the first author that we said, I have to take this very seriously, because whoever this first author is going to represent my voice, my brand. The story is going to be kind of the thing. So
Right.
I got to be sure. So there were a couple of things about the book that
Which book was this?
This was Once More Summer.
Once More Summer. Okay.
Once More Summer.
Mm-hmm.
And so she had submitted it, and there were a couple of things that I don't know if you remember, Beth. Do you remember
what you sent me, like
the
an email
critique was?
Yeah, not specifically, but you gave me some really, really thoughtful feedback. And I think offered to get on a call. And at that point, you know, I had written this thing, I had finished it. I went to, which I would certainly recommend to any aspiring author. I thought it was well worth the time and money and effort. I lived in New York City at the time. And I went to a pitch conference. So basically, you spend 3 days. The first 2 days, you sort of workshop essentially your query letter, your pitch of your book.
Right.
And everybody sort of gets up, and I don't know, there were maybe 15 of us, and people kind of give their feedback. And then the person leading it was a published author, and she kind of gave her feedback. And you sort of spend the 2 days workshopping it. And then on the third day, you actually, you know, a little bit like The Voice, right? Like you pitch live to a handful of agents and publishers in the industry, and they give you kind of real-time feedback.
Wow.
So it was very positive in the sense that I think every single agent and publisher I pitched to liked the hook and wanted to see my pages. Right. So I knew that the hook was strong. And that's a big deal in the fiction world, right? Like having this strong hook, and you you know, in one sentence sort of summarize the story. And that particular book was about a woman in her 20s who goes back to her childhood summer camp to work as a counselor after her world sort of falls apart, right? That was the hook, right?
Yeah.
Which was pretty easy to be like, oh, okay, right? And they all wanted pages, and I submitted to all these different people and got rejected across the board without a ton of feedback, little snippets of feedback.
But that's the hardest part. Like, you want the feedback.
Right.
I find myself emailing back the people that reject me, like, could you give me anything?
Right.
Anything,
and some do and some never respond, but go ahead.
So I think Danielle did give me a ton of feedback, right? And things that, you know, in looking at it again, some of the feedback that I had gotten made a lot of sense. So I parked the book. I think I picked it back up. I did a lot of the edits, you know, very typical kind of first book stuff, right? It started in the wrong place. You know, the opening was a little more, you know, telling than showing. You know, the protagonist, for different reasons, wasn't coming across as likable as, you know, people want a protagonist to be. I mean, there were some very typical kind of missteps, right? So I went back and I did a lot of editing of it, and ultimately, you know, Danielle published it. At that point in time, I didn't have any career aspirations or author aspirations beyond just seeing it out in the world, which, again, for your first book, probably isn't that realistic in hindsight anyway, now that I know everything I know, right? Like, that book maybe should never have seen the light of day.
Even Heidi, she won't let me read her first book. She's like, you should have never seen the light.
Yeah.
Because that's how you learn, and that's how we learn, you know?
Yeah,
absolutely.
So we did. So we continued. I wrote 3 other books kind of, and Danielle was, you know, heavily editing them, which is also sort of how we realized we had a similar kind of vision for things, and, you know, which she was really, really strong at. I was probably at that point a lot weaker at, in terms of very lofty descriptions and things like that. But yeah, I mean, going back to kind of what you were saying about, you know, nonfiction, fiction, I mean, it's not our space, but my understanding is the nonfiction world, you really need just a huge platform to be able to get an agent. And it's much more about you than the work, right? I think what we've seen in the fiction space, and we could talk about it, we've had, you know, our own version of trying to get agents and things like that. It seems, very much about the work and less about you, right? Whereas I think in the nonfiction space, it's more about you and your platform. And hopefully you have a good product. In the fiction space, if it's all about the product and like, oh, what after we fall in love with this, tell us about your sales, right? As opposed to like us being like, oh, we had
That's
all
an
this
interesting
success.
distinction. I didn't think about that, but yeah, I think that's a good way to
Yeah,
say
I
it.
think so. I think that's what we've kind of, right, because we very recently acquired new representation. And I think we were under the impression like, oh, we had 2 Amazon first reads and they sold really, really well. And this is going to be some huge guarantee of like an agent being so excited. And yes, I'm not saying it didn't move us to the top of a pile. And we, relatively speaking, compared to what a lot of authors experience, we did get a new agent in about 2 months, which is pretty short. But it wasn't like a slam dunk that because we had all this, other success, they were immediately interested in reading what we wrote. It really came down to like, I like this book or I don't like this new book.
Right. The story and everything. And that's interesting because every author we've interviewed says the same thing. I had a best-selling book, or I had a great, first book, and I thought automatically my agent and the publisher is going to want my second and my third and my, and it was like, no, I had to start all over again. And I think people don't realize that it really is about the story in the fiction world. And if they don't like it, they're not going to represent you, which is, me coming from very nonfiction, more like a self-help and memoirs, whatever. It's just like, oh, wow. I can't even imagine writing a novel, but I may with someone. And this is why your story really was it was inspiring to me, because I had the idea of turning this nonfiction book about the matchmaking industry because nobody seems to be that interested in it. And I've become like the whistleblower because I'm airing out all the dirty laundry, and it's never been done before. So then I woke up one morning and I was like, oh my God, maybe I should turn it into a novel.
Yeah, I'm sure there's excellent anecdotes in there.
Absolutely.
Right, on a true story. And then maybe I won't get sued, but not that I would name names or anything. So
sure.
But so going back to your Life Derailed, actually, because I really truly like the story a lot. One of the things I wanted to ask you as I was reading it is you mentioning the Russia-Ukraine war. And obviously, I don't want to give details of people that haven't read it, but and when I saw that, I was like, wow, that's so not only relevant right now and the last few years, right? How long this has been going on, but also someone who was born in Ukraine. I was like, wow. And I almost like wanted to know more, like what happened and how, but I know that wasn't the big point of the story, but how did that come about? Or how did you like, okay, well, this is the world we're living in now. This is what's happening. Let's somehow put it in the book. Or was this, playing part of the story?
Yeah, I mean, some things is right. We outline some things as your writings sort of start to take shape. I think we knew, from the get-go, Remy was going to be some sort of widow. Right? She was going to be this, like you've got right? There was going to be some sort of mix-up with, the AI dating platform and things like that. So we needed her to be out there looking for love. She could have been single, but we thought it would be a little more powerful to make her a widow so that, she was sort of slowly dipping her toes back into the dating pool. For the life of me, I cannot remember why we decided that her husband
But it works.
was going to have.
Well, we needed the whole Celeste piece, which I don't know how much like we want to give away, but the Celeste is the politician. When we needed the article that like made her human, like that was very important for Remy to tackle. Like, I don't know, there were a lot of different brainstorms, but it somehow came about that.
Maybe if we could tie the article she has to write to prove to Jason that like AI can't write it, it needs to be really personal to her. So what would be really personal, maybe something around her husband's death. And then the death could no longer be like he was sick, right? It had to. And then I think as we started, that feels right, spitballing like how he could have died, that
Yeah.
That
I
makes
think we came up with this idea that he was going to be a war correspondent, and she was going to have to come face to face with, the reason he was killed.
right.
And also, with it being so contemporary with the AI stuff, I think we did have a different war in there, didn't we? We had
Oh,
the
I don't know if we had a different war. I think when we went, I think it's not funny at all, but I think when we went back to do developmental edits, we were like, this is still going on. Like, this is still
yeah.
relevant, as opposed to being like this, do we need to update it?
we have to update it. I know, and that's what maybe that's what it was.
I
Yeah,
think
but
it
I
was the
remember there
opposite.
was
I think it was
something,
like,
right.
do we need to make any changes here? Is this going to feel like no longer relevant? And then I was like,
Right.
nope, still happening.
No,
We
it's
can
Still
still
happening.
use it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it's the same thing. It feels like with October 7th and everything going on in Israel. And I'm just waiting for someone to write about those stories as well. But as I'm reading it and just the word Ukraine, and I was like,
Right.
it was so personal to me as well. I was like, oh my gosh, wow. There was a lot. I mean, I did cry a few times too, because it was so, and my father passed away a little over a year ago, so it's been really hard. It's been really hard to read books that have any death in it, period.
Yeah.
But especially when it's a parent or spouse, and so that was hard. So whenever I ask for books, people I'm going to interview, I'm like, well, if there's death in it, maybe you can send me something else. But this was written so well that it was, yes, I cried, but it's okay. I cry all the time anyway. It was so poignant, and it was just so it was a great part of the story. I can't imagine it being anything else, so good job on that. And
And I think
you.
it's really interesting, and it was a learning experience for us, like death, grief, like it's not a particularly active, I mean, as much as it feels like it is, like on the page, it's not a very active emotion to have someone grieving, right? They're just sad. And so we definitely went through a lot of developmental edits to like not have that like weigh down so much of the book.
Right.
Because if you start in a place where someone is, grieving, it's tough to get like that momentum and get the story kind of moving. So it was, we worked a lot on that to like make sure the emotions were there, and that was definitely a part of the story, but not to let it like bog down the story.
Throughout the entire,
hopeful than kind of,
right. Yeah, no, I love that, and I think it's important to talk about, right? But you're right, and grief is too, as I'm learning and going to support groups and everything, it just comes out of nowhere. You think you're doing well, and then the next moment you're like just bawling, something reminds you or whatever. So I think, and the other thing, obviously the mom, Ruth, okay, we talk about that character.
Yeah.
Ruth Russell. We love
Jewish
her.
mothers. Right. But I'm like, oh my God. And then I'm like, okay, do I do this with my kids? Like, am I like this? How did you go about writing her? Was this based on your mother? Is it based on you? Is it just based on being a mother, a Jewish mother?
So I'm Jewish. I would say, I think we've said Ruth is probably about 60-40, like 60% my mom, maybe 40% Danielle's mom. Like a lot of the things that the character says have come directly from like one of their mouths or some version of it. I did go to see Funny Girl, the revival with my mom. And I would say the whole time that we were there, I kept being like, this is so good. And she was like, yeah, she's no Barbara. And I was like, okay, like, okay, I get it. But like, right. And I was like, can we not enjoy it? She's like, so like some of that was, directly from, and I think some of the things about like her being in contact with the mom, you said, like, comes directly at when your mom is like, isn't a cell phone portable, right?
Oh yeah, yes. Making sure, when my mom's like texting or calling, and I'm like, oh mom, I really gotta go. And she's like, isn't the cell phone portable? And take it with you. Gotta hang up.
Yeah, I know. I think
So,
it's every mother. My mom does the same thing. Like, I'm like, okay, mom, I gotta go. Yeah, okay, great. But there's
but right.
one more thing. Even the voice
Always.
I've seen her like every day for the past 4 days. And she calls me this morning, she leaves me a voicemail, and it's like, well, look, I know you're busy, but call me when you can. And I'm thinking this is the end of the voicemail because there's one thing that I want to talk to you about. Well,
Right,
call me
right.
when you
Yes.
can, you're busy.
Yes.
And then another thing, and another thing. I'm just like, is this just a mother thing? Do I do this?
Right.
You think. So that was really great. I
It was
love that.
yeah, we had the most fun. We laughed really, really hard writing
We
our
did.
dialogue. We laughed really, really hard writing the entire scene where,
Yeah.
there's a mix up over like when she sort of catfishes the guy for Remy and yeah, we loved her.
Also, I think you would appreciate that. So the gefilte fished instead of catfish joke.
Yeah.
That was almost a premise for a book itself. Beth and I really rolled that around as a title for a book, and really we
Wow.
went whole hog on that for a little while in terms when we were rolling around pitches. But we just thought that was such a funny gefilte. Mom, you gefilte fished him. So
Yeah.
thought it was such a funny joke, and yeah, we do crack ourselves up. I don't know I don't know how, and there are still moments where we'll read back through a book a zillion million times for edits, and we really do go through a manuscript incredible number of times. But what still makes us laugh, we do voices when we read them. It just is it's an enjoyable experience, and I really can't say enough about how very lucky we talk about this often, how very lucky I feel, how very lucky we feel to be able to write together. I think it is part of the joy that to share those things with one another, and the jokes with one another, and being able to pull from my sources and her sources, and
also maybe I'll spitball a joke or an idea that I think is kind of funny, or she will, and then it's like, that is funny. What would make it even funnier is right.
Yeah.
And then we're back and forth, and we get to what we think is like the funniest version of whatever it is.
Right.
Which I did write, and she also wrote alone, and that's fine. But you don't have that, right? Like you don't have the ability to be like, would you? Here's a crazy idea. Is this funny?
Right. Is this funny? It does take some vulnerability too, because there sometimes we'll throw it out and be like, nope, that's not funny. All right, yep, let's get that out of there then.
I was saying right before you joined, I think that's probably the biggest piece of advice I would have for somebody who is thinking about co-authoring is, if you are super precious about your ideas, your words, your jokes, right? If you're it would hurt me to the core for someone to not like them, or I would really hate to see those words deleted, or right, might not be the best path, right? Because part of what makes us successful and be able to churn out books at a pretty quick pace, right, is that we don't get stuck on things like, oh, you just deleted that sentence and I loved it, right? So for the most part, when we're in the document and we're kind of writing together, we're both going back and forth and up and down and deleting and adding words. And every so often, one of us will pause and be like, wait, put that back. There was a reason, because in 3 paragraphs from now, I need that word again. Occasionally,
or it's really great conversation too. If I'll delete something, or Beth will delete something, like, oh no, put that back. I meant for it to be this. Oh, I didn't read it that way. I read it as this. So we'll either tweak it so that it reads correctly as the joke, or we'll be like, oh, you know what, actually we don't need it, or whatever it is. So sometimes we delete something because it's not translating, and so we can have that kind of conversation, or why it needs to be there. So
but it's great. I think it's great that you have each other to bounce those ideas off, and brain I almost said brainwash. I'm still learning 5 years later. I'm still having a hard time with some of the English words. It's just, brainwash, brainstorm. To me, it's like one word.
Just salt the water. I don't know.
And it's like, as I get older, I feel like I'm reverting back to my native language, and the kids will be like, "What? What did you do?" They're actually keeping notes on their phone about all of Julia-isms, of the stupid things that are
the
for
studies.
example, a lot of the, and which goes about what you were talking about, some of the things I was reading, not just in your book, I have to go back and reread it, because I'll read it once and it's like, wait, what do they mean? Oh, no, that's not how I read it. This is
Right,
what they mean.
right.
And certain sayings, in English
Mhm.
language, I think when I'm reading, I'm always thinking of other immigrants, whose English maybe
Hmm.
second, third language. And for example, for a long time when I was writing my book too, certain things like, for example, give you an example to make this concise, beating around the bush to me
Mhm.
makes no sense. I understand what the hell it means, why, I know why people mean it, why people use it. And I always ask my husband, my kids, people like beating around the bush.
What
They're like,
is
yeah,
the
you're not
origin
quite,
of it?
can't quite get to the point. And I'm
Yeah.
like, why wouldn't you say beating the bush or beating around the point, or like, why the bush?
Yeah. Why the bush?
Exactly. What are you beating? What? Like, it makes absolutely no sense to me. So a lot of times people like myself, who I may have some sensory disorder, whatever. What is it called? The sensory auditory something, right? So I can't read audiobooks. People send me audiobooks.
Hmm.
I'm like, I'm sorry, nothing is registering. Like, it goes in
That's
You
one
have to
ear,
see
interesting.
it.
out the other. I need a physical book. I need to look at the words. I
Yeah,
need
the
to
words. Yeah.
flip the
Mhm.
pages.
Mhm.
So, do you think about that, or maybe like
So it
non-native speakers reading?
yeah, now we do, and I can tell
Sorry.
you why we do, which is so I think most publishing houses do this now. Books go through sensitivity reads,
Oh, okay.
which is probably newer, but in the last couple of
Yeah.
years, right? So it goes through developmental edit reads, right? Where you're paired
Mhm.
up with an editor who really is focused just on the plot, the story, the characters, areas that can be strengthened, maybe unnecessary plot points, right? Things like that. And then when that's done, it goes through copy edits,
Mhm.
and also, which I think is probably the most amazing of all the copy editing, which is like the continuity editing. So
Mhm.
like it's just an example, right? Like one of our books was set in the winter time, like it was New Year's Eve in Times Square, and we had, a drunk person in Times Square like fell into her and spilled, a beer. And I think we wrote in the book like on her sweater,
Mhm.
and this continuity editor was like, well, it's winter in New York. Wouldn't she be in a coat? Yes, she would. Right. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
that's like, write it. Yes, you're right.
Right.
You need to be
And
very meticulous to be a line editor. It's
I
incredible what
love
they
that.
catch.
yeah, and
It's
they'll catch
wild.
tons
Yeah.
of stuff like that. Like if you have a character wearing a wristwatch, but then you have them looking up at a wall clock, it's like, well, would they if they have, or if they have
Right.
their phone out, why would they be right? And then, right, it's up to us to decide how we want to fix it, but they'll point out all of those things. And then the final edit is just like sensitivity read. So
Mhm.
all of our books have had that, right?
Mhm.
In our very first book, we wrote that the character kicked off some blankets. We use the word spastic, like in a spastic way, like kicked off the blankets.
Ah,
Did not know, completely did not know, was not aware that that word in the UK is super offensive. It basically
really?
means that someone has like a physical
Like
disability. And
disability. Yeah. Which we had no idea. We felt
Yeah.
And it
awful.
went
We
through a
contacted,
sensitivity read, and they didn't know.
they didn't know.
And we got a handful of reviews on Amazon UK about this word. I mean, it was really like we had put, I mean, it'd be like putting in something,
Really?
like, I don't know
Really.
what to say, but
Yeah.
something really, really terrible. Um, so we,
I'm going to write this word down so
I
I
was
won't.
right.
gonna say, yeah.
So
Uh,
we immediately
Don't want to use it.
contacted, our publisher, and they removed it from the book.
mhm.
And so something like that, mental health is obviously a big issue for people.
Yeah.
So it's very commonplace when you're talking to be like, oh, I feel crazy, or that was
They're like,
crazy.
don't be insane.
Right.
Right. We go through
That
and we're very careful about,
and
taking
that
those
gets
words
that
out.
got flagged a couple of times in our sensitivity reads,
Mhm.
things like, am I going crazy, or did he just say that, or
Mhm.
something you would say in conversation, right?
Seemingly right.
And
Hmm.
they'll flag it and say this, you know, crazy, insane can be taken a certain way. And,
Insensitive.
ultimately
Sure.
it's up to us if we
Of
want to
course.
change it. But
Yeah.
I think now, because we've gone through 3 books of those kinds of edits, as we're writing, sometimes we just automatically are like, let's not even like go that way. Let's say, my
Right.
bananas, or like it's
Something.
Right.
Yeah.
right.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's word choice for us now. Each time we learn a little bit more about like things we've done wrong, or not wrong, but like things have gotten flagged or questions. And we obviously try not to repeat the same mistakes.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and I think the world we live in now, obviously words matter, and it's everything
Absolutely.
has to be uh more PC, and I think when I've been doing some comedy too, and in the back of my head I'm thinking, can I do this? Like, can I go to an open mic night, let's do a stand-up and use these words anymore, because everything is off limits now. And that's where I keep thinking, God, things were so much better back in the 90s. Like, you just did whatever the hell you wanted. And, and I even remember my son was saying, like, oh, yeah, kids still use certain words and we say so, but, we really get in trouble for it now. But it's not meant
Right.
that way, right? I mean, I don't even want to
Right.
say the words.
Right.
But
Right.
in a way, our world has changed for the better,
Yes.
obviously.
Yes.
But in a way, we're censoring everything. Do you ever feel that way when you're writing too? Because I know I do, just doing videos, doing any kind of jokes, anything out there. I mean, not to mention books, but do you feel that way too? Like, can't say anything anymore, right?
It is a tough, like, balance, but I think that we generally write in a way that, like, I don't know.
I would
We're
say
not,
too, you can speak to, but I
Like,
feel like we're more aware of the reviews that we get, and
right.
sometimes that comes up
yeah,
when we're like,
Yeah.
when we're picking our words, and also, choosing the jokes. And I think that we are mindful um, as we're writing it, but usually I think it comes pretty naturally to us to, like,
Not to
avoid anything
be.
too offensive, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah.
It's interesting because I'm naturally very offensive. And it's one of the things I really have to work on, but I always preface it by, this is really my culture. And, growing up, obviously, Eastern Europeans, Russians, Ukrainians, it's just, we're very blunt people
Blunt.
in general. And it is not taken as being offensive. It's just you're blunt and we don't really have a filter, and I think nowadays it's like, even listening to some of the things my dad used to say or my mom, and it's like, oh, you can't say that, you can't do this anymore. I
Yeah.
mean, I remember we were out to dinner or lunch or whatever with my dad, my mom, my husband, my kids, and my dad said something to the server. He was like, oh, you're a very attractive girl. And I was like, what this was like a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. I'm like, you can't do that. And he's like, why not? She is, and she should know. Yeah, you don't comment on women's appearance anymore. Like, we don't do,
Yeah.
and he just didn't understand. Like, but I'm giving her a compliment. I'm like, I
Right.
understand. Say it to yourself. He's like, and then I said something like, well, what if someone came up to you and said, you're a very good looking man? He's like, I would love that. Oh my God. Doesn't work.
Yeah.
Or paying a server. He gave a server like $10 or something to tell my son that he's very good looking and he looks good today, or he's whatever. I'm like, what are you doing? This is like sexual harassment. I'm not sexually harassing her. Like, well, you're kind of making her do so. She did it, and she's like, oh, I don't mind. I'm like, I am so sorry. I left a giant tip after. But I'm thinking, oh my God, this is the stories that I didn't put in the book. Like, but
that's great. That would be a
But I
really
was gonna
great
say,
anecdote. We're gonna pocket
absolutely.
that one.
Yeah.
is it okay? Like, I don't know if people will laugh or people will think, oh my God, you guys are really messed up.
What's wrong with you?
But maybe this is why I can't find a publisher. I don't know.
It is
but
a tough industry, and I'm curious about your process, so we'll have to maybe talk about it.
I'd love
But
to.
that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, it's definitely changed. Obviously, the whole publishing world has changed.
Yeah.
Reading things, just reading more contemporary works, it's very different. I mean, I went back and I started reading Judith Kranz's books. I don't know if you guys ever read them. And they were
No.
written in like, the 80s. And I'm like, whoa. I mean, I started reading her books because she was a Jewish author, and people were telling me about her, like, oh, you got to read the sex scenes are so great, and they are.
Mm.
It's very, very interesting, but it's no 50 Shades of Grey.
Right.
It's a
Or all
very,
these romanticy books are very
yes,
Right.
spicy.
old
Yeah.
world, but also the words that they're using too. I mean, there's the gay flying around,
Mm-hmm.
all, but a derogatory version of
Right.
that. There's a
Hmm.
lot of like, slander kind of word, and I'm like, whoa, whoa. I'm reading that. I'm like, God, the story's
Maybe.
amazing, the writing is great,
But the
Yeah.
but I'm like,
yeah.
wow, this was all okay, and
Mm.
nobody even thought twice,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
And in a way, I'm like, wow, I'm so glad things have changed,
Hmm.
right?
Mhm.
um and I, it's tough, it's a totally different world. So, but I truly, like I say, I want to read all your books now, so if you have any laying around, feel free to send them to me.
We will. I was thinking about, I think you'd really like the campfire series. Did you ever go to summer camp?
Yeah. So, actually, I'm going to send you my book too. I actually wrote about a summer camp that, well, first of all, we went to, it's a whole other podcast, but we went to a lot of communist camps back in Soviet Russia, because we lived in Latvia in the Baltic states. My mom
Oh,
and I are both
wow.
born in Ukraine. So every summer, my parents would ship my brother and I off to Ukraine because my grandparents were there. We would spend all of our summers in Ukraine, up until Chernobyl. And then we
Mm.
didn't go back
Oh,
there for a
yeah.
while.
There.
Wow. Right.
Right. So even though it didn't matter, we were still not that far away. But so my grandparents, because we all lived in the city, in a metropolitan city, in apartments, my grandparents didn't want me, my brother and I, sitting in an apartment all summer long. So
Mm-hmm.
they would ship us off to camps, and they were communist camps. And there's a whole chapter about them, which was horrific, the kind of camps that they were.
Oh my
But my
gosh.
grandma, knowing, having connections, she would get us into the best camps, which they were not. It was awful. They were like in the middle of the woods. There was no bathrooms, there was no toilets, there was no showers. It
Oh
was
my
it was
goodness.
it was bad. And this, we would go not like for a week, we would go for like a month at a
Oh
time.
my gosh.
And then would come back, they'd give us a few days breather, and then they would sign us up for another camp. So it was awful. But then when we came to America, and our local synagogue or local temple kind of took us under their wing, and they gave us free, Sunday school, Hebrew school. And here I am thinking, I need to learn English first before I can learn Hebrew and study the Torah, which is all great and all, but we don't know anything about being Jewish, being Soviet Jews. And second of all, someone sponsored my brother and I to go to this amazing Jewish camp up in the mountains, in the woods in Northern California. And I was crying. I'm like, again with this goddamn
Not again.
in the woods. But it was so shocking to me, because they were, the things they were doing here, they were actually fun, right? We had
Right. Right.
fun, and we sang songs, and there was
Right.
guitar, and there was lessons in painting and whatever. It was like,
Yeah,
what?
that was more my camp experience, not
Right.
the.
Not
So
the
yeah, to answer
former.
your question, I think I would like to read these series.
Yes.
Yes. Well, it's just it's funny because that was the book that Beth and I, that's how we met, and that was the book that she had written first, and together, as she had said, we kind of like, she had written them, but I heavily edited, and we brainstormed them together, because when she first wrote Once More Summer, it was a standalone book.
Mm.
And I series were very, very big, and they were becoming bigger. And I said, how would you feel about like writing this as a series? And she said, well, if there's a story to tell, but like I'm not just going to write, so a story to go on and on and on, and it doesn't really say anything. So like, if we had a story, she said, I had an idea I was playing with, but like, I didn't think about it too far. I said, let's get on a call, let's brainstorm, let's see what we can come up with. And it developed into like, it's a trilogy, but it's kind of a 4-book series, a trilogy. And then the 4th book is from the male's point of view. He's like our favorite hero that's written. But what's really cool is we were talking about how our process has changed in Google Doc. This one, I would say, Beth, I give her all the credit, really drafted all of them. And we did work together and brainstorm, but she did like all the heavy lifting and all the writing of it. But once we decided to like come together and write together and brand ourselves together, we did consider, hey, like, let's rebrand the Campfire series. And I said, and we'll co-author them.
Yeah.
So in those, I went back and had a little bit more, like, especially, it was kind of a cool opportunity because it'd been such a long time. We'd written a couple of books since. So we were able to kind of look at all these books with a bit of a renewed eye. I added in a bit of material and I amped up the descriptions, and we cleaned it up a little bit and kind of re-released the series. And it is a little bit more co-authored. But so it's one of my favorite books that we have. Like, I just think it's so fun, and it's summer camp, but like, as you said, the California one, the fun one.
Yeah. I'll have to definitely. And so now you're saying that there's also a TV series based on.
So we pitched one. That book got optioned again. I think it was just a very good hook, right? This idea of someone going back to their camp in their 20s, right? So we pitched it. We had a lot of really great conversations. It was a cool experience. We pitched to a handful of studios and networks and things like that.
What's really cool.
These things had sort of died in the process. It was also in the middle of COVID, and that was probably a piece of it too. But yeah, it was definitely a great experience.
To interject, so I had mentioned that initially the publisher or the producer that had contacted us and was optioning the book was interested in it for a full-length feature. And then that producer left and went to a different company, and they were working with, a company that had right of first refusal that was more episodic. So then they said, instead of a full-length feature on just the first book, now we're looking at episodic television for the series. And we ended up like getting in touch with a screenwriter, and we wrote a pilot for this show. And Beth and I had no experience of writing TV pilots, and like, that was, I think, really the birth of, not only were we putting together these pitches and like literally meeting with these executives and these pitches, and it was a lot of time that we had to come together and put this stuff together. But then when we wrote the pilot, that was like a really cool co-writing experience, trying to navigate this thing together. And then we got it kind of edited, and we worked with this screenwriter who had experience like writing on Breaking Bad. And we were like, this is so cool. Like, what a different kind of challenge for us. And that was another thing that we really learned that we do well, is that every time we were told no, we didn't put it down. We didn't stop together. And there were moments where I would want to stop, and Beth was like, no, we're going to keep going. Or Beth was like, we're throwing in the towel, forget all of this. Like, but I was like, no, we're going to keep going. So that's the other cool part about having a partner, is this industry is really tough. And there are a lot of no's, so many more no's than the yeses. But we just keep telling ourselves that, like, just takes that one person who can see it the way we see it. And we have to have faith in our hard work and the vision, and it is going to happen. So we just kind of have to keep working for it. And every time we were told no, we would pivot. So what can we do instead? How can we change this? What can we work on? And we never stopped moving forward.
Even the book,
steps are little.
The book that got us our first agent was Heart Restoration Project. That book went out on submission, did not sell.
Yeah.
And in the process of it trying to sell, we started a new project and realized,
which was at the advisement of our agent. We said, what happens if this doesn't sell? Like, oh my gosh, this was like such a great book. We love this book. What do we do? Well, you write the next book. I'm sorry, I meant to step on your.
Oh, no.
And
and we kept spitballing ideas. And the agent was like, that one, I think that one. And we're like, okay. And that was the book that ultimately sold first, was kind of the second book after a not so successful experience with the first book. But then ultimately that first book became the second book that sold, because once we had a little bit of momentum, they were more interested. So, to Danielle's point, like the pivot, right? Like we just keep pivoting. We take the advice, we hear what's popular, not popular, working, not working. Okay, let's on to the next. And so getting all the way back to where we started with this AI book, I don't know if we fully conceived it when we started, but we felt like, again, this idea of the hook, right? The hook was strong. Like, woman gets sort of, misled by this AI program. And, we felt like there was enough there that we could come up with some story that way.
Well, so in the series, so you don't know if it still might be picked up, or because now
probably
unfortunately it might be dead, but I mean, it always could be revived. If anyone out there is listening and is interested, we have a pilot. I mean, it probably needs some work, but we do really love that story and those characters. And it was 4 books and a lot of our time, and especially early on, like we were learning together. And a lot of the publishing stuff, I mean, that was one cool thing about taking Beth on too, is Beth and I had a very clear understanding that this was new for both of us. And like, I don't have any other clients. I don't have any other writers in my publishing company. You are it, but you'll get my undivided attention. And what I don't know, I'm going to learn. And if you're okay to kind of take the step with me, like, let's do it. And so that was a bit of a leap on both of our parts, but it's wild to think like here we are now, and we're working on a follow-up called The Magic of Us to it's not related, but it was the bought next to Montlake. So we're working on that book. That book is due to our editor.
I feel like you should just give her a quick pitch on it, because it does have to do with like, not a matchmaker, but like,
you're so much better at the elevator pitch. Do you want me to do it? Okay.
So it's a woman who has, for lots of different reasons, related to her parents, her own love life, has kind of decided that, relationships aren't for her. She becomes a sort of popular host of a radio show called Love is a 4-letter word. And she basically became famous by telling people they don't need love or relationships. And a lot of that is BS.
Being very cynical about love.
Very cynical. And then sits down with, what is she, like a fortune tellery kind of?
Yeah, she's at a speaking event, and on like Galentine's Day, celebrating women, whatever. And it's like a tarot reader, kind of mystic, who's there doing, readings and whatever, just for fun, but calls her over after hearing her spiel and saying, it sounds like you need like a little love in your life. And she's like, that's the last thing I need, or whatever. I don't really believe in love or magic, and kind of do a little kind of spell. And she's like, okay, well, that was cool. See ya. And she leaves, doesn't think that anything, happened. It doesn't seem like anything's changed until she goes about her way, until she wakes up next to a guy who, she recognizes, thankfully, but like, it's a guy who was a decision a few months ago. She had a summer tryst with the summer before, and it got very serious, and they were kind of really falling for each other, but it went against her brand. And she has a book coming out, and it, she doesn't know her life as someone who knows how to love and fall in love and be in a relationship that is trusting like that. So she pushes him away, and they're supposed to meet at Christmas in Paris, and she never shows. But when she wakes up after Valentine's Day, which is on Valentine's Day, she wakes up and he's next to her in bed. And so it's almost as if her life, she had made the decision to go to Paris and meet him that Christmas. And kind of what transpires and how much it changes her brand, and how much like the show might be at risk. And so I don't know if that
was a long pitch.
Yeah, that was a very long pitch.
I have to get it down to like a sentence. The sentence
to refine it a little bit.
Cynical radio host. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
think
fun.
it's.
We're about three
I
quarters of the
love
way
the
through.
fact that, yeah, women are always told you can't have it all, can't have it all, right? Like you
Yeah.
can't have this and successful career and this and that
Right.
and the love and the thing. It's like,
Hmm.
why can't I?
Why
Why
not?
can't I? Or at least for part of my life, right? So,
Yeah.
but oh, that's fascinating. I want to read that too now. But well,
Put it
yeah,
on the list.
we have gone longer than we've gone with any other guest, and I feel
Oh
like
my
we
God.
can talk for another hour. So we'll have to have you back on, and then we'll
We would love
continue the
that.
Yeah. Thank
conversation.
you so
That would
much.
be
This was
great.
fun.
No,
I
this was
love.
wonderful speaking with you.
Thank you. I love talking to you guys, and I love your writing style because I am pretty picky about what I read, and
Oh,
there's
that's
some
great to
books
hear.
that, and I think a lot of people say it either resonates with you or
Yeah,
it
of course.
doesn't, right? And it's sometimes
Yeah.
books are just not for everyone, and that's okay.
Yep.
I was actually told by many people that like they didn't get my sense of humor, and they never left me a review after reading the book. And I was like, okay, at first I was really hard, like, what do you
Right.
mean you
Yeah.
don't like my sense of humor? Everybody laughs
Right.
at every piece of crap, that comes
Right.
out of my mouth. And then my husband's like, no, not everybody understands your dark, Russian
Right.
sense of humor. but
I really think you have something with this communist camp
I was gonna say
juxtaposed
that's
against like
juxtaposed against a
normal, yeah,
summer
typical
camp.
sleepaway camp. Yeah.
well, I mean, there's a whole story there in the book, so I'll have to send it to you and see
Yeah.
what you guys think.
I was
But
gonna say you'll have to share it with us. We'd love to read it.
I will do that right now. Yes, actually. So, but anyway, so thank you so much for
Yeah, thanks
being
so much
here,
for having us.
for
Thank
talking to me.
you.
Thank you for taking the time. I loved your book. Thank you for sending it to me.
Of
And
course.
I hope to continue talking to you guys.
Yeah. Yes.
Absolutely. We
Thank
hope so
you.
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share. And even if you didn't enjoy it, share anyway. Thank you for listening, and come back to Someone Had to Say It.